Podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined with my co-host, Reggie, and we have a special guest, Michael. And Michael, forgive me if I say your name incorrectly, pronounce it incorrectly. Salusto?
Sallustio, very good.
Salucio. Okay, I'm sorry. Welcome, Michael. Welcome to Fully Human Connections Podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you very much, King.
And gentlemen, one of the things, Michael, you might not be aware of this, but one of the ways that Reggie and I like to get started, we kind of go through our gratitude moments for the day. So we list out the things we're grateful for. Um, so I'll begin, just kind of set the context. I'm grateful for my life, my health, the ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, have a sound mind. And I'm grateful for mother still being alive. I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose. So, Reggie, you want to?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I have my standard indoor plumbing and a refrigerator that works with food in it. But this morning I'll be even more specifically grateful for that. I have we've been talking about this. I actually have a review copy of the book in my hands now. Although there's a lot of things have to be corrected. But the process continues. So I'm just grateful for all of the people that help make that process work for me besides my own efforts. So I'm really grateful for that as well. Michael, you.
Well, I do this every morning, so let's just go from where I am right now. I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you two guys, my old friend Reggie and my now new friend King. So thank you for having me. I'm grateful for this opportunity, and um, I also am grateful for mental soundness. At least from my perspective, I'm mentally sound. You may not think so, but um, engage in these kind of conversations and foster these relationships to me is what it's all about. So thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And for our listening audience, Michael is a JD, and he's a mediator, and he's a parent with a specialty with working with parent children. Correctly, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I do specialize in custody matters. They call it child access in my world. And I'm also a parenting coordinator. So it's a little different than a mediator. I do both, depending on the clients that I'm dealing with.
Okay. Excellent. And listening audience, this will be our fourth and final week on the topic that comes from Reggie's book on the topic of slavery, Jim Crow, and civil rights. So again, Reggie, would you go ahead and kind of set the context for during our discussion for today?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, King. So again, the book is entitled Healing America's Narratives, and the subtitle is The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. So what the book does basically is it takes a look both historically and currently at some of the downsides of the United States of America. And in the book, there are 5 chapters that focus each issue. There are 5 major issues that get a chapter dedicated to it in the book. And one of those chapters is on slavery, Jim Crow, and civil rights. So, race relations in America. The other 4 are the subjugation of women, the betrayal of Native Americans, the Vietnam War, and post 9/11 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's some other things in there too. But what we're looking at is trying to understand the current United States of America in the context of some big picture history. And so again, as King, as you said, today is the 4th conversation we'll be spending on, which chapter 5 of the book, civil rights, slavery, Jim Crow, and basically racial relationships in this country. So that's a thumbnail overview.
Appreciate that there, Mike, Reggie. So I'll set the context by just bringing forth kind of my thoughts on where I see race relations today, and just kind of get you all thoughts on this as well. That I'm a 52-year-old black man, obviously, and I would say that I'm Generation X. So I'm coming from this the child of a baby boomer. So definitely didn't experience the civil rights movement, came at the tail end, being born in '69. But I'm an avid history fan, and I love to study history. So I definitely have a firm understanding of these three topics of slavery, Jim Crow, as well as civil rights. And what I wanted to say is that from my perspective, I know I might get a lot of pushback from other folks out there, but just looking at how we've shifted in this country I'm speaking of, the last 10 years, I believe what I've seen and from my experience, my perspective, that I would make the statement that I don't believe that America itself, the country, and society doesn't want to be racist anymore, or racist. But I definitely believe that there are systems that we still live within this country, we still operate within. And I think that's really the crux. And I think we get caught up on individual biases that people may have, and the media propels those individual acts as though racism is still at its height. And again, what I like to get people focused on is the systems that we need to be focused our attentions on, and how do we change these systems. My background is system engineering. I personally just give people the idea, get a better idea of what I mean by the systems. For example, the healthcare system, the education systems, the financial systems, the criminal justice systems. Those are some of the systems I'm referring to that still has racism embedded in those systems. And that to me is a bigger challenge that we need to face instead of trying to say that America itself is still a racist country. So I just kind of want to start our conversations off leading with that particular topic.
Yeah, Michael, you want to jump in, or you want me to jump in here?
Well, you go ahead first. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So first of all, in terms of the systems, I agree, King. I mean, there are definitely systems that are, whether intentionally or unintentionally, whether consciously or unconsciously, that are inherently racist, because the earliest days of the country were built on enslaved peoples being put to work to build a structure for landowners and wealthy people, and that so many things have taken place since the end of slavery. I mean, so take the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamations, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. I'm throwing the 19th Amendment, so women of color could vote as well, and yet we still have issues where my skin pigmentation gives me an implicit advantage in many ways in different places in the country. The one thing I want to add to the systemic change is, and this is for me, like, changing individual hearts and minds and changing systems. And some people take really strong perspectives and say, well, you can't do individual hearts and minds. You have to change the systems. And other people say, no. You have to change individual hearts and minds. And for me, that's like, and I'm dating myself with this example, that's like the Cert's breath mints commercial. It's a breath mint, it's a candy mint, it's a breath mint, it's a candy mint. It's actually, it's both. Or the light beer, tastes great, less filling, tastes great, less filling. Both of them are true. And the systems are made up of people. And until we get enough people whose hearts and minds have changed to want to change the systems aren't going to move, I don't believe, because systems don't suddenly change. So I don't know if that agrees with your view, King, or if it's a little bit different from it. But I definitely agree that everything from healthcare to, God help us, the private contractor prison system now, to even implicitly in the federal government, I mean, in Congress, especially in the Senate. I just think there's some implicit racism in there. I don't believe that the country as a whole, like the majority of the people, are inherently racist. I don't believe that. And we get into a whole conversation about the use of not racist versus anti-racism, which, Ibram Kendi does a really great job of differentiating. That's probably too much for us to jump into right now. But I agree. Inherently, there are, whether implicit, explicit, conscious or unconscious, biases in systems in this country, and including the larger legal system. What happens when somebody gets arrested and goes through law enforcement into the imprisonment apart and into the jurisprudence, it's not an equal playing field yet. I don't think. So I think we mostly agree on that. Yeah,
Mostly.
yeah, mostly.
I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Mike.
No, I agree. I mean, it's very complicated and almost paradoxical when you look at the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act back during LBJ. I mean, the courage it took him to push that kind of stuff through and make those enormous changes in the systems. And yet here we are today dealing with the rollback of the Voting Rights Act in a lot of ways. And you're seeing it happening in state to state, and you see the effort even on a national level. And yeah, it's hard to make sense of it because I agree with you both. And when you say that the country, by and large, the individuals in this country are not racist. And that's my experience as well. I mean, the most people I talk to, maybe it's just my circles, but from what I see and hear from the people that I interact with on a daily basis, and in my arena of mediation, I think largely people agree that we should all have equal rights in every aspect of these systems. But then you have the pushback we're seeing right now in a lot of ways, and it's discouraging. And I think conversations like this can only help.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I would say, Reggie, where we disagree is that I agree that people make up the systems, but I think that as a system engineer, it's not so much about really changing the system. I think it's really about coming up with different systems.
Okay.
I don't think you can really change the system because the systems are designed to work the way they work, and they're producing the outcome that they were designed to produce. So trying to change the system, I'm a big person that believes in, from a spiritual perspective, I believe in the laws and principles. And from an engineering perspective, understanding in order to change a system, you have to first really understand how a system works. Like you take a computer system, you can't just, if someone says my computer doesn't work, right? Well, then the first question you begin to ask, what do you mean it doesn't work? What does it not do? Does it not come on? Does the screen not come on? Does the keyboard not work? Is it not saving? Is the sound not working? So you got to begin to ask questions to try to troubleshoot what does not working mean. So when we look at, like, for example, the criminal justice system, and what I mean by changing that entire system. I give you an example of what I mean. So you have George Floyd, and when George Floyd was killed, and you had the initial medical examiner that came along and said he died from asphyxiation, that it wasn't murder. That was his initial diagnosis. Well, then it came out that that's the same medical examiner that had also testified in like 5 other cases of police killing unarmed black men, and it was never the police's fault. See, that part of the system, and what I'm saying that it's wrong, because now you go into a medical examiner who probably would tell you to this day, if you ask him, he's not racist, but he's definitely biased. And he's part of a system that protects, that believe, our initial thought is to believe what the officer says. This happens. Our system is taught to believe what the officer says. Even though, again, from I would say a black person's perspective, our initial reaction is disbelief what the officer says, right? And so that's what I'm saying, that I don't know how we can change that system other than to come up with a new system that's really predicated on officers have to have the burden of proof as well to reestablish that trust, because it's been so many cases of where we've seen officers will protect that blue line more so than in truth. That seems to be the most compelling. And not to walk down that path of the blue line, but again, as a son of a police officer, I understand a lot of that culture and a lot of that thinking. My father was a police officer. He had a twin brother who was also a police officer. I had another uncle that was a police officer. So my early years, I grew up being raised in that kind of culture and that thinking of how police officers think. And I get it, that when you put on that uniform and you have to go out here into the environment in the community that's dangerous, in the streets, that you have a job where you can actually get killed on your job, there's a whole different way that you have to think and operate with that as a pending danger. So that's why I think that everyone should be a police officer. You shouldn't just be able to apply like any job. It should have to be a certain mindset, and people have to screen better. So create a system about how we select people better. So those are some of the things when I'm talking about bringing a change to the system I'm sorry, creating a new system that I'm referring to, not necessarily changing that system because the culture runs too deep. And then my final point, real quick, would be another example would be I don't know if you all are familiar with I live in Baltimore City, and Baltimore City has a rich history of, racism, marginalization, things of that nature, particularly within the police force. Freddie Gray would just brought it out to the surface. But there's been so many documentaries and shows about the corruption in Baltimore City. And recently, there's a new docudrama that came out called "We Own This City," and I don't know if you all are familiar with it or seen it, but it's based on a short 6-part series on this what was called the Gun Trace Task Force, which was a special unit that was created to go out here and get guns off the streets. And so this 6-part docudrama centers on these cops who were actually going around and plant evidence, doing drugs, killing drug dealers. They were pretty much criminals themselves. This docuseries focused on. But my point, where I'm going with this is one of the first scenes in the first episode of the show, this rookie cop who was one of the key people that they brought down. He's there on this rookie day, and he has all this, I would say, naiveness and euphemism for being a police to protect and serve. He's really thinking that way. That's why he became a police officer. And one of the police officers tells him right there, first day in training, listen, all the stuff you learned in the academy goes out the window. This is Baltimore City. This is how it works. So he right there begins to tell him how the system works. And so he gets corrupted through that action of saying, this is the system. So no matter what his intentions were, he got corrupted within that system. So that's what I'm saying as far as not just changing the system, but actually coming up with new systems that addresses those kind of problems that can come up. And so no matter what police chief has come since then, what mayors have come since then, the system still produces the same type of toxic racial bias that still exists to this day within the Baltimore police unit.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you just said, Kim. I don't think we're far apart at all with regard to a new system as opposed to changing the old one, which is probably immune to change in many ways. And one of the things that was for me both terrifying and heartbreaking at the same time, and it was you mentioned George Floyd. In that moment when Derek Chauvin was kneeling on George Floyd's neck, 2 other police officers were helping to hold him down, and the 4th officer was doing crowd control so nobody could interfere. Everyone else other than those 4 men who was watching that knew it was wrong. There was the young woman who videotaped the whole thing, thank God. Unfortunately, she was there to do that, but fortunately she did it. There was a young African-American man who was a martial arts instructor, and he was very vocal, but he knew enough that if he went and tried to interfere with what the police were doing, he would have, even with his martial arts, he would have been taken down, he would have been cuffed, maybe even shot. So he was afraid. Then there was the other woman who was a Minneapolis firefighter, paramedic, and she said, let me go and just check on this man. And they said, no, you should know better. You don't interfere with police work. So I just think that, people there were all afraid. It was fear. You can't get in the way. Even though the police are doing something horrible, you're just going to become a criminal if you interfere with them. So there was this fear there. And that's a new system is definitely needed. So I agree with that. 100%. Those moments were heartbreaking and terrifying because everyone except the 4 officers knew that what was happening was wrong, and they really couldn't do anything because they weren't armed, and they kind of knew the system. And if I try to interfere, I'm going to get taken down by interfering with police procedures. The second point I wanted to make, and it goes back to what we've been talking about, is I don't believe in our deepest souls that this country has ever, and this is kind of a big statement, and we don't have to you don't have to follow it, in the conversation. We haven't really ever recovered from the Civil War. The United States beat the Confederacy, so the North won, but the ramifications of that win and that defeat are still being lived out in various ways in this country. So I don't think we've ever fully recovered from that, from that war. And I think that goes into, the states' rights versus federal rights, and what Michael referred to now about once the states have more say into what happens with voting registration in a given state and even within a given district. Many of the former slave states are taking steps to restrict access to voting, and many of the northern states are working hard to make sure that as many people as possible get to vote. And if that's not an indication of what hasn't been resolved since 1865, I don't know what is. So that's a kind of an aside that history, we still carry that history forward with us, I believe. So again, that was a little bit of a side remark, but I think it was relevant to the bigger picture we're talking about.
There's still a lot of this, in the national or the federal government system, I should say. There's still a lot of this good old boy network going on, which is why I really feel. So to your point, King, you mentioned earlier, if somebody comes into the police force, right, they have these aspirations of making a change and doing it better and doing it right, and they're told by the people who have been there, and now they're mentors or supervisors, that's not how it works here. You do it our way, and this is the way it's always been done, sort of thing. The same thing happens at the federal government level, and in a lot of ways, it's the state government level. You've got people who've been there forever. This is why I really firmly believe that term limits is one of the biggest steps we can make to making change. And I want to get we'll come back to that point in a minute, King. I want to get back to you on this point when you say not change a system and create new systems. But it's really challenging. My sister just, she ran for the school board with a mission to make a change and had all these aspirations, and she gets on the school board, she becomes president of the school board, and she still is coming up against this, well, that's not how we do it here. So, she dedicates on primarily a volunteer basis, they don't get paid much, dedicates her life to this. And it's still really hard to make change in a system that is, racist in a lot of ways, right? Because of the people running it, not because of what's written on the books. And so to your point, King, how do you distinguish? So you say change the system. When it comes to term limits, in my mind, that's changing the system. In your mind, is that creating a new system?
Well, I think that's a change, but when I say that's talking about the political system now. When I say create a new system, like for me, I think the political system is broken on several different areas. One of the things we need to get away from a whole party system. I think the whole party thing is wrong because we're now left with choosing identity politics based off who we like, not their platform, their policies.
Right.
So like I've voted Democrat in every election that I've been able to vote in, but I'm not happy with what the Democratic Party is doing. But then I'm told, well, that's a better alternative than the Republican Party. And it's not so much I disagree with the Republicans' platform. I just don't like the candidates the Republicans actually put out. So I'm much more of an independent person in my voting. But to that point, that's why I say that's just, get rid of basically say, yeah, we have a free party system, but everyone knows that the independent party doesn't really get any kind of media attention, doesn't get a chance to participate in debates or anything like that. So it really comes down to the media really pushing forth two of the primary candidates, Republican and Democrat. And let's look at voter rights. Now, a lot of folks would say, well, that's Republicans trying to make sure that blacks don't vote or repeal back laws. Well, if you look at the system and understand the system, and you take away the bias of it and just look at, again, how the system operates, it's really in their best interest to do that. When you have a populace that you realize is not going to vote in your favor or vote for your party, and you have a way to politically maneuver to stop them, I don't think it's so much a race issue as it is a protection of your party system mindset. So, in other words, that's why I believe if we get rid of the party system, then we can deal with gerrymandering, which is a huge issue that I see. So it's so many parts of a system, the political system, that is wrong. Trying to change one or two parts won't have any impact whatsoever. And then finally, we get caught up believing that if we change the color of some of the people in the system, that it's going to produce a different outcome. And again, it's a system, so it doesn't matter if you have black politicians, white politicians, gay politicians, straight politicians. It's still going to produce the same outcome because that's what the system is designed to do. And that's why I'm an advocate behind change it, or come up with new systems. Sorry. And one of the new systems I would actually say if you come up with is, again, no gerrymandering, no two parties. You vote based on a person's platform and their policies on an individual. That's what we vote on. And then definitely get away from electoral college. Those kind of things to me would be some significant changes if we really wanted to change. But I think that the media keeps everybody so dumbed down and so biased into their tribes that they force us to sit there and pick a side and stay on that point and not really critically begin to think about what's in the best interest or how best to go about creating a new system.
Yeah, so thank you for raising the the whole, especially the last piece, the electoral college has to go. I mean, if just in one specific example, in the absence, if we had a popular election of the president, Donald Trump would never have been president. Just to use that one example, and I apologize to anybody who thinks that having him in the White House was a good thing for the country, but he would never have been president, without the electoral college. What I want to go back to, King, what you said earlier about the documentary about Baltimore City and the new police recruit who's on his first day on the job after the training basically gets told, that's okay, that's the theory. Now we're going to tell you how it really works. And this is something I meant to say earlier, and I just lost the thread. But one of the officers who was helping to hold down George Floyd, and I forget his name. He had a very light beard, very well-trimmed beard. It was his third day on the job as a Minneapolis police officer. He was of mixed race, and he joined the police force because, or everything that you said in the documentary, King, he wanted to make a change. He thought because he was of mixed race, he would have an advantage to be able to speak to different people from his own perspective. And so on his third day on the job, he's put in a position where he has to choose to go against the senior officer, Chauvin in this case, which if he does, and George Floyd doesn't die, this new recruits, this guy on the job for the third day, his career is over, at least in Minneapolis, maybe as a police officer anywhere, if he goes against the superior officer. If he goes against the superior officer and George Floyd does die, maybe he becomes the guy that tried to do the right thing. But just to again back up the strength of your argument about new system being needed, this poor guy in real life, his third day on the job, gets put in what effectively is an impossible situation. And I would argue, I don't know what I would do in that situation. I'd like to think I would risk my career to save a life, but who knows? But it was over like that for him. And he ends up, he's going to spend most of the rest of his life in prison because of that. So again, I agree so strongly with this idea of systemic, new systems, which is the extreme version of systemic change. Get rid of the current system and bring in a new one. Hard work because of the staying power of the status quo that is pervasive throughout the country. So yeah.
It's going to take a lot of, you just alluded to it there with the new recruit. It's going to take a lot of courage from each of us. And, it's easy to blame the media, but the media is only feeding off what we're giving them. If that's the energy and the angle that they're sensing, they're going to go for it. And we're buying right into it. And it's unfortunate.
Well, that brings us full circle, because one of the arguments I make, not just in this chapter in the book, which deals again primarily with race, and specifically race as it involves enslaved peoples, the Civil War, lynching, Jim Crow, etc., is that it's we rightfully point our fingers at times at politicians and the media because they've earned that. But ultimately, we as a people tend to be willing to tolerate what Fox News gives us, what MSNBC gives us, because they're kind of, they're echo chambers, one at the other. Whether I agree or disagree with their content, they're both doing essentially the same thing. And they're not the only two, but they're two, good examples. As long as Americans are willing to continue to tune in, buy the products advertised on those networks, and the people, I like to refer to them as paid performance commentators, because that's what they are. They're not journalists. As long as they keep, being willing to take money, and none of them are poor, they get paid really well to just keep on banging home the same things over and over again, and not really entertain civil discourse with opposing opinions. As long as a country we continue to tolerate that, and the large news corporations continue to put it out there because they need the corporate dollars in advertising, that's not going to change. And I think a big part of that comes down to, there's several things. One is greed, because a lot of people are getting fat based on how the news media works. Actually, let me rephrase that. A few people are getting fat, based on how the news media works. But enough Americans are willing to tune in and keep nodding their heads to their favorite, performance news commentator. And, I think poor Walter Cronkite, to just think of one, is, turning over in his grave. And other people, and there are some real journalists out there, but most of them aren't on television.
Well, absolutely. Now, I wanted to bring in, we have kind of from Mr. Willard's victory. Yeah. The beautiful aspect of this is that everyone is humble enough to listen. That's where change happens, respect, understanding, or everything. And that's where really the purpose of the podcast is. We don't have the answers, but what we were saying is that we are committed to engaging in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's where it starts. And Michael, you alluded to it earlier. And I think that's what's so important, is that folks got to be open to say, I want to have the conversation. Reggie knows this. I always refer back to my dog, because I'm the owner of a dog, and I'm studying all the psychology of being a dog owner and understanding how dogs behave. One of the who I really admire his instructions is they call him a dog whisperer, Caesar Milan. What I really like about his approach, because it really fits humanity. It talks about everything is energy, and understanding how the energy of a dog is, and that's where I really come from. So he says basically a dog, and this the same thing fits when in my business is building relationships and connections, that a person is going to have 4 types of reactions when you connect with them. Either they're going to fight, flight, submit, which means open-minded, or they're going to avoid, right? And that's kind of what a dog does as well. And I think that, to your point, Michael, where we keep blaming the media, and what you're saying as well, Reggie, that I think that what we're doing right now is the precipice of changing when we kind of work to create our own media. And it's not going to shift everybody away. And see, that's one of the things I've learned, is that we got to get away from trying to get everybody to move into a certain thought. It's like a person who believes in building what I call connectionally intelligent tribes. Those are individuals who are in line with my principles and my purpose in life. Those are people I want to connect with. And for those who don't, I do want to avoid. I want to avoid like a pothole, because why put forth the energy trying to change someone unless they're open to submitting to the conversation? Say at least, okay, I don't necessarily agree with the premise of what you're saying, but I'm open to hear what you have to say. If you're saying something that's interesting or thought provoking, I may consider your points. That's all we can ask. And then my final point to this, I want to say, kind of going back to your book, is that I think that if we're going to create new systems, we have to first begin to accept and agree that we are operating in this country off false narratives. And I think that's the first step. These are false narratives that exist. Like I think one of the greatest narratives that's false narratives that we operate under, that all races are monolithic. They keep us in these tribes based off our race, based off our political orientation, our sexual orientation, ethnicity, that our gender, that because you are a black man, then you must think this way, and all black men think this way, and this must be your perspective. And it's like nothing can be further from the truth. Not all white people think one way, not all black people think one way. But the way the media talks about it and puts it out there, you will think that it's always a black and white issue. And that's one of the false narratives I think we got to really come to terms with, because I have folks that I deal with on a daily basis where I live. And yes, we may have the same, our hue, our skin color might be the same, but our thoughts to be we know near each other at all, a way we think and we operate, what's important to us. And that's what I really want to, that's one of the first narratives I want to change, is to say, let's stop putting everything in this monolithic context. Let's look at it from the context of, let's really, I think if most people were asked the question, would you rather have news that was more positive or news that was more negative? They would choose the more positive news. But their behaviors continually choose the negative news because it's more sensational and it's attractive. So I say all that to say, gentlemen, I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what do you all think right now as we shift into the kind of the second half hour of our show. What are some of the recommendations you all see as far as either changing the system or beginning to create a new system?
I just want to. I love what you said about the whole monolithic view, like all of those people, all of these people, all of my people, all of your people, whatever, are the same. That's a category error. It's just not true. And one of the things we spoke about in an earlier conversation was this idea of worldview and cultural givens, and that's kind of an underlying theme throughout the book. Is that each of us, and there's never been an exception to this anywhere on the planet. This is one of the few things I would say that's that big and risk saying is true. Everyone is given a worldview at birth by the conditions, the chronology, the geography, the climate, their parents, and other adults, at the time of their birth. They're all given a version of the world. And I would argue that each of us, especially, but not only in the third decade of the 21st century, has an ethical obligation, usually beginning somewhere in middle to late adolescence, but definitely into adulthood, to challenge our cultural givens. In other words, what my parents gave me, what my teachers gave me, what my aunts and uncles, the other adults I came in contact with, the view they gave me, and see how it holds up against my direct experience of the world. And if you really do that, some of the things hold up, many don't, because my parents grew up, but they were both alive during World War I. My father taught in World War II. They both lived through the Depression, so their view was grounded in all of that. A lot of what they believed that they gave me with good conscience didn't really fit as we moved into the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It was true in the 19-teens and 1920s and 1930s, but the specific content of some of their beliefs about the world no longer was accurate. And it was my responsibility to challenge that. So I think everybody needs to challenge what they were given. Not to think that it's always going to be wrong, but just to say, does this really hold up with my experience of the world? And in the absence of doing that, the systems are going to thrive. They're never going to change if we don't challenge what we were given. So I just wanted to, I didn't really answer the question you asked, King, but I think, that's one thing I think that we need to begin to do if, in fact, we're going to create new systems, is really interrogate the cultural givens that each of us received, at birth in our earliest years moving forward. So I'll shut up there and let somebody else speak.
Well, on that point, Reggie, most of us don't even know any better to question those things you're talking about, to question the way we were taught, we were brought up. And it's conversations like these that can maybe bring that out again, going back to this grassroots effort. But how do we change that macro system, which is basically the way our culture operates, to ask people to challenge their cultural givens, to ask people to look at things differently, to ask people what makes them tick each individually, and ask them to see the world through their own eyes and through their soul, essentially, rather than what someone has told them to think or told them how to behave. It's I keep coming back to courage, but that's a big part of it, because even if you give them the opportunity, a lot of people won't take it. Case in point, the young recruit in the Eric Chauvin incident. I mean, that right there. If he didn't know that, maybe he didn't realize at that moment that that was even a possibility. Can I do this? Can I challenge this guy? He's my supervisor. Should I be doing this? I mean, I would argue, yeah, you should. It's your human obligation to do it. It's a human rights issue right now. But he's young, he's new, he's worried, he's afraid. There's a lot of fear going on, worried about his future. And like you said, now his future is prison. How'd that work out?
Yeah, and I would just add, in defense of him, it's one thing for the three of us to speak about that moment, and I raised it. In retrospect, living it real time with the badge of the Minneapolis Police Department on his chest, his weapon holstered, and the real life events in that moment. That's way different from our looking at it in
Sure.
hindsight. But that's not challenging what you said. I agree with you 100%. What is it? How is it that we learn? I go back to John Lewis, who I just love. I always have. And the late John Lewis, that he was willing to consistently challenge the status quo, and over 40 times in jail, got his head cracked open, and he just kept doing it.
Yeah. Some people are just wired differently, right? I mean, some people are just wired that way. Maybe the three of us were wired differently, because here we are questioning all this stuff right now, and most people aren't. But there are Reggie, you're familiar with this. There are indigenous cultures who have in their culture built in a system for doing just what we're talking about, for challenging your cultural givens and the way you have seen the world up until your adolescent point. And at that point, they have what's called a rite of passage. And it's a ceremony, it's a ritual, whatever you want to call it. But they're called to question how they have seen the world up until this moment, and how should they see the world when faced with obliteration, extinction of themselves. And it's basically a soul initiation. That's one way to deal with this. Whether we can get that as a mainstream event in this country, who knows? That's a dream of mine. But yeah, it's powerful stuff.
Well, and one of the reasons that gangs thrive, especially for young men, but for young women as well, is that we, in fact, as a culture, as an American culture, whatever that means, because we're pretty diverse as Americans, we don't have, other than the military, we don't really have rites of passage into adulthood as a lot of indigenous cultures do and did have. So, and we don't have, if you look at the other end, because of that, if you look at people who are considered leaders in the world, whether it's in journalism, entertainment, politics, whatever, we don't really have elders we can look to. Yeah. And by elders, I don't mean old people, but I mean people who tend to be, chronologically advanced, but also developmentally, spiritually, intellectually, emotionally advanced as well, who we would automatically look to and say, well, what does he or she say? We don't really have those in this country. And I think that's part of the problem as well. The culture and the systems, to go back, King, to your point, aren't conducive to rites of passage into adulthood or rites of passage into elderhood. And we desperately need both, I would say. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you up, Reggie.
No, I was done. That's good. Thank you.
I wanted to show another comment. We have Thomas Schmidt. Thank you for tuning in, Willis and Thomas. Appreciate you all for listening, as well as any other listening audience we have out there. But I wanted to say this in reference to the young rookie trainee officer you talked about before. See, I really blame society for that. There's a documentary right now on Hulu of some officers in New York who did just what we're advocating. They went against the system. They were ostracized. Lives were threatened, and no one even talks about that. It's like, so that's where I'm going with this. It's like when you talk, and I don't want to say what John Lewis did was easy, but I would say it was different when you're going against the police system as opposed to the political system. Because if you're trying to fight that blue line as an individual, like that, had George Floyd not have died, and that officer had taken steps to stop that situation, that officer pretty much would have put his own life at risk, or have been definitely kicked out of force, or definitely made so uncomfortable that in that particular precinct he wouldn't be able to even continue to be a normal officer. And that's, again, that system. So I think as we talk about how to go about making that change or create a new system, we need to get away from this blanket statement of saying all police are monolithic as well. Yeah. See, I think we don't lift up the police who actually are doing a good job. We just keep on putting out there, we don't say all police are bad, but we just make it the narrative that, and it sounds like every police officer is bad. So the one or two that want to stand up, it's like, where's my support gonna come from? I mean, we even have a term, politics or in corporations, that someone takes a bold stand, we call them a whistleblower. That's not something you want to be. That's not something that you say with pride. So just those terms, I think as we talk about creating new systems, we got to lift these people up and call them heroes. Yeah. Then the person will want to be a hero. I don't want to be a whistleblower, but I would like to be a hero if we begin to change some of that vernacular around that. But a quick question I wanted to ask you all both of this, because I've been kind of playing with this in my mind just from a picture standpoint. As we say, a picture tells 1,000 words. So my question would be to you all is this. Imagine if you see a man sitting down and saying, well, I'm going to tell you his color, tell you what he's doing and what he's wearing. And I want you to let me know what you all think his thoughts would be politically or socially, whatever. So he has a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on. He has a Make America Great hat on. He has a rainbow flag belt. He's eating a bagel, a gluten-free bagel, and he's reading the Wall Street Journal. So tell me, what do you think his thoughts would be?
I love it, man. He's a searcher. He's trying to figure things out. He's very confused right now, but that's all right. It's a place to start, man.
So my thought, that's actually great, King. I love that question. Is I think he's a conversation starter, and I want to talk to him because I want to ask him. In my mind, I see your wardrobe and your diet as being paradoxical, and I want to know where you're coming from. So I'd want to be. I think he's a conversation starter. That's how I would judge him before I knew him. He's somebody who wants to be in conversation.
Well, see, that's kind of where I'm going with this question. Is it paradoxical to believe that you can believe that Black Lives Matter and still also feel that you want to make America great again? Now, again, I'm not saying you necessarily agree with that political party's rhetoric and stance. It's just that you believe in the ideal that I want to make America great again. Now you can debate, okay, what does again mean and what does great mean and all that. But I'm just saying, just on the very surface of that, this person said, I'm an American citizen. American has issues. I believe in the ideal of making it great again. And I do also believe that Black Lives Matter. And I'm also supportive of gay rights and gay issues. And I love financial, so I believe the Wall Street Journal provides an excellent source. And at the same time, I'm gluten-free. You know, can that person really exist in today's society? Because now society tells us, no, you can't. You have to choose one of these lanes to stay in, and you need to stay in your lane. Because if you go outside that lane, then you are wrong, or you're not normal. That's where I'm going.
That's exactly what social media perpetuates in my mind, is this black and white way of looking at the world, even taking the race out of the context. It's you're with us or you're against us, a kind of a philosophy or a take on life. And to Reggie's point, my God, I want to sit down and talk to this guy. I want to learn what makes him tick, and that's what I do in my world every day in mediation. Is because this happens a lot in mediation, especially in custody matters, where one side will say, well, he always does this, or he or she never does that, and those are bold statements, because always and never are always red flags for me, right? It's like, wait a minute, always, really? So then I say, well, don't you want to know why? Because I do. I mean, I hear what she's saying about him. I want to know why. Why is he? What's his motivation for doing these things that seem wrong on the surface? But maybe he's got a really good explanation for it. So I invite them to ask questions, and if they don't, I ask questions instead of the old term calling people out. Call them in, because calling out doesn't accomplish anything. You guys talked about it a few weeks ago as a cancel culture topic, but when you call someone out, you're passing judgment on them, and you're shutting down the conversation, right? Rather than, let's call them in, let's ask them why they're doing these things, and see what comes out of it, and maybe that'll even trigger more questions. And now we're talking about the nuances, which is the essence of human nature. We're complicated creatures. We don't think black and white. It seems that we were portrayed that way in the media, but that's not how people think.
Right.
I mean, you ever followed your thoughts in any given 10-minute period of time? It's all over the place.
Hey, speak for yourself. So, no, I agree with that, Michael. And King, I wanted to give the guy's wardrobe. I wanted him to have a Black Lives Matter front of his T-shirt and support the police on the back, just to make the. No, I'm really serious. And I think I got stuck with. You say "Make America Great Again" hat. I picture a red hat with white lettering, and I connect it directly to Donald Trump. So if it just said "Make America Great," I would have a whole different take on it. But I agree 100%. I could do all of those. Support the police, support Black Lives Matter. I want America to be great. I admit I can eat gluten. It doesn't bother me. So the bagel's going to have gluten in my case. But yeah, I mean, and that's the integration that we want. We want people who are increasingly more fully human, more fully integrated in the largest meaning of that word, masculine, feminine, in terms of their worldviews, who care at a deep, broad level. That's what we're talking about with fully human and fully human connections. So that was I love the question. I'm still picturing that. I may go out and buy a couple of shirts and things and maybe change them up and start wearing them around, and hopefully not get beaten out in the street somewhere. So
Yeah.
And we're overlooking the one possibility here. This is a homeless guy who had no clothes until 10 minutes ago. Somebody gave him a shirt and a hat and a bagel. He hadn't thought about any of these things.
Exactly. So that's a great point. It's like, to him, they're all clothing and they all serve their purpose.
Yeah.
And gentlemen, as we get near the top of the hour, I just want to share one other comment we have from LinkedIn user. When you judge others, you're really judging yourself. I think that's true. But one of the things we do, Michael, as we get ready to bring the show to a close, we also want to admit the fact that, again, folks, that we don't say we have the answers here on Fully Human Connections, but we are committed to exploring the conversations. We're not afraid of the hard conversations, but we always want to end on a positive note. And one of the ways we like to end is to each of us share who a person that could be alive or from the past that we believe exhibits being fully human that we admire as a way to kind of end on a positive spin. So, Reggie, you want to go first and kind of share who you might have as? I think it could be somebody you said before as well. So we don't always have to come with someone new.
Yeah, I don't remember all the ones I've used before, so there's a possibility of repetition. But this one I think is new. This is something I learned about in detail in the last 4 or 5 years. So I want to I'm just really grateful for Chief Standing Bear. And I believe he was part of the Ponca tribe, Ponca. I hope I have that right. Even if I have the tribe wrong, he challenged the policy that he had to stay on a given reservation. This is back in the late 1890s, I believe. And it was one of the first times that a group of white folks, journalists and attorneys, took his case and filed a writ of habeas corpus on his behalf. And the judge found, in fact, because at the time, Native Americans weren't considered people or citizens. And his case established that, in fact, Native Americans were considered people under the U.S. Constitution. And he became, in fact, they have a statue of him somewhere in Congress in Washington, D.C. I forget exactly where it is. But Standing Bear is considered one of the early civil rights activists in the United States. And he's somebody that, I never read about him in my history books, but I read about him in my research for the current book. So Chief Standing Bear is my go-to for somebody who's, fully human. Yeah.
That's, Michael, I'll go last.
Well, I'm gonna I'm gonna probably buck the trend here and say, I could easily name countless public figures, celebrities who fit this description of being fully human. But much like Reggie did, I'm going to name some people that no one's ever heard of. And there's people I experience every day in my life who go unnoticed and unrecognized for embodying these qualities. I mean, my life partner, Anne Marie, embodies it every day with her courage and her grace and her commitment to self-improvement and to touching others. My daughter, my stepson, who are adolescents, and I watch the courage they exhibit every day to take this life on and try to figure out who they are and bravely navigate the world and our society, who are constantly trying to change them, because that's how we're brought up. We're brought into this world with the soul and a purpose, each of us. And our society from the get-go is trying to change that and get us to conform. So I just feel like people I interact with every day embody this, and I could go on and on with it. I could name celebrities and public figures, but I don't know them. I know what the media wants me to know about them and what I see in the history books and on TV, but they're complicated people, and LBJ is one who, wow, that guy did incredible things in his time in office for the civil rights movement, but what a conflicted figure. So, yeah, I'm going to name the people that I interact with every day that I think embody it.
Excellent. You make some great points there. Absolutely. There's definitely people, and as we say, our normal life that definitely embodies this. But I'm going to take a page from your book there, Michael, and say, I got to give it to mine for today would be LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And to your point, he definitely had some contradictions in his life, but he took that stance that we always say we want someone to take. And he changed history. When I was raised, I remember, I can still look back now at my house when I was a kid. In that house, we had 2 pictures on the wall. And I used to didn't understand who the white man was. It was the white man next to Martin Luther King Jr. And later on, I got older, I realized it was John F. Kennedy. And it was like Kennedy was always upheld within the black race as someone, as this figure of great civil rights. As I study history more, I'm like, for what? And, Lyndon Baines Johnson did much more for blacks than Kennedy has ever done, right? And I'm not taking anything away from Kennedy, but I'm just saying that, to me, Johnson didn't get the kind of recognition that he deserves for the act he stood on. And he stood on that, and still throughout history is failed in comparison for his recognition for that. So I definitely want to give him his flowers for that and make the recognition. So I want to thank you all, Michael, Reggie, for being a part of today's show. I think we had a great conversation. I want to thank the folks who tuned in, Willis, Thomas, whoever the LinkedIn user is. Thank you all for your investment of time and energy. And until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., we want to encourage everyone to continue to walk down that path of making fully human connections. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen.